The Ruy Lopez is an opening that teaches us to control the center, to build our position, to neutralize the opponent's counterplay, and finally, to attack in the correct way. And today, we will see a perfect example of its strategy and of many of its core concepts in a beautiful game by one of its greatest exponents, Bobby Fischer. Back in the 1600s, this move was actually considered bad since it did not attack the Black King directly. But as we will see later on, nothing could be further from the truth. For now, the Yugoslav grandmaster with the black pieces, Svetozar Gligoric, replies with a6, and the bishop retreats to a4. The game continues with knight f6, hitting the e4 pawn, but white simply castles, ignoring the threat. Now, if black were to capture the pawn, that would lead to the open variation of the Ruy Lopez. However, in this game, Gligoric prefers bishop e7, entering the closed variation. Fischer answers with rook e1, finally defending his pawn on e4. Now that this pawn is protected, the threat of eliminating the knight on c6 and then capturing the pawn on e5 becomes real. This forces black to take measures, and the most common move in this position is b5, breaking the bishop's pressure against the knight. The bishop retreats to b3. Black continues with d6, defending the e5 pawn, which at the same time frees the knight on c6 from that responsibility, making it available to go to a5 and capture the strong bishop on b3. This cannot be allowed, so white plays c3, a key move both to give the bishop a safe retreat square on c2 and to prepare the central expansion with d4. Black castles, and Fischer continues with h3, a subtle prophylactic move that prepares the attack later on. But why do we say this is actually an attacking move? Well, let's understand it. Let's roll back the move and see what happens if Fischer does not play it. White intends to push d4 and completely take over the center. But if he does it immediately, black could respond with bishop g4, pinning the knight and increasing the pressure on d4. An easy solution to this problem could be to push the pawn to d5. But with the black pawn still on c7, this advance could be considered premature. For example, black could reply with knight a5, threatening the bishop. And after it retreats to c2, since the c-pawn is still on c7, as we mentioned before, black can begin counterattacking white's center with c6. And white does not want to push the center too early because it would become overextended and could be destroyed. And without the center, there is no attack. For this reason, and let's roll back a few moves, Fischer prevented all of this with h3. Gligoric also plays h6, and this is a maneuver we must learn when we are playing with the black pieces. In a moment, we will see the idea behind this move. Now, since there is no longer a possible pin with bishop g4, white can calmly advance the pawn and claim the center. Black answers with rook e8, and that is precisely why they played h6, to prevent the knight from coming to g5 and threatening the f7 square once the rook has moved. Fischer continues development with knight d2, and Gligoric completes the maneuver with bishop f8. This is an important piece regrouping that we must know when playing with the black pieces. The queenside knight now heads toward the kingside with knight f1. And notice, by going to f1, it stopped defending the e4 square. But here the defense is tactical. For example, if Gligoric tries e takes d4, c takes d4, and then knight takes e4, they would immediately lose to bishop d5, creating a double attack against both knights. This is a typical tactical resource in this type of position. That is why, in rolling back, black does not try to win the pawn, but instead continues development with bishop b7. In this way, the knight on c6 is defended, and now the threat of capturing the pawn becomes real. However, the white knight arrives just in time to defend it. Black continues with knight a5, and of course, this important bishop must not be allowed to be captured, so it retreats to c2. The knight jumps to c4, but Fischer immediately drives it away with b3, forcing it back to b6. It is important to highlight that b3 is not only useful to expel the knight from c4. In typical Ruy Lopez structures, this move serves a much deeper purpose, but we will understand those reasons better a little later. For now, a question to check if I explained myself well before and if the idea was clear. Is this the moment to close the center with d5? Not yet. Because the black pawn is still on c7, Gligorich could respond with c6 and counterattack the white center. That is why Fischer does not push the pawn yet. Instead, he continues with a4. Black reacts with c5, and now, this is the perfect moment to close the center with d5. Because the pawn has already advanced, it can no longer strike back at the center with c6. The Ruy Lopez is essential to learn, since it teaches us so much about controlling the center. And the center is fundamental for carrying out a proper attack. If we want to launch a flank assault against the king, we must first have a solid center. Gligorich continues with c4. And when this move is played, it is crucial that the b pawn is already on b3. In this way, Fischer can also lock down the queen side with b4. If that pawn had still been on b2, after playing b4, black would have had the chance to capture en passant, opening the queen side for counterplay in that sector. But with the pawn already on b3, that possibility disappears. After this, since the bishop now runs into a solid pawn structure and has no activity on that diagonal, Gligorich decides to retreat it to c8. Fischer continues his development with bishop e3, while black does the same with bishop d7. It is worth noting that this is already move 19, and only now are the bishops being developed. This is possible because the center is closed. If the center had been open, developing the bishop so late would undoubtedly have been catastrophic. Returning to the game, pressure is mounting on the a4 square, and Fischer prepares to completely seal the queenside by advancing with a5, at the same time threatening the knight, which retreats to c8. Once the center and the queenside are fully closed, bad news arrives for the Black King. In the West, the battle has come to a complete halt, and there is nothing left to do. In the capital, the same is true. Therefore, all of White's forces will now concentrate on a single target, the Kingside. And so, when I am asked, what is the true idea behind the Ruy Lopez? The answer is clear. Develop your pieces, take control of the center, build up your position, neutralize Black's counterplay on the queen side, and only then launch the decisive attack against the king. And why will the Ruy Lopez help you play better? Because it teaches you how to master different types of central structures. In this case, it shows us how to play with a closed center. Returning to the game, Fischer begins to plan his kingside attack with queen d2. Gligorich also starts organizing his defense with knight h7, and we will soon see the idea behind this move. White continues with king h2. And why this move? Well, because for the moment, the attack will be carried out along the g-file thanks to the breaking point on g5. Black follows his plan with bishop e7, and for Fischer, it is now the right time to place the knight on f5. If Black decides to eliminate the knight, after the recapture, the white bishop on c2 gains a new square on e4, from where later it can dominate the entire position. But Gligorich does not capture. Instead, he continues with bishop g5, aiming to trade his bad bishop for White's good bishop. That was the purpose behind the earlier move knight h7. Now, with which piece should we capture the bishop on g5? With the knight or with the bishop? I hope there is no doubt. Even though we are in a closed position, the correct move is to capture with the knight, because in the great majority of positions, the bishop is the stronger piece. We will go deeper into that in other videos. After the trade on g5, Black takes back with the h-pawn, and Fischer reinforces his knight on f5 by pushing g4. If Black had captured this piece, it would also have been possible to recapture with the other pawn, dangerously opening the g-file for the attack. That is why Gligorich decides to leave the knight in place and instead drives it away with g6. Fischer calmly retreats it to g3. Black reinforces the defense of his pawn on g5 with f6. Now, let us recall something important. When Fischer moved his king to h2 a few moves earlier, it was with the idea of opening the g-file for the attack, since the breaking point was on g5. But after the exchanges on that square, and with Black recapturing with the pawn, the breaking point has shifted. Now it is on h4. That is why Fischer also changes his plan and brings the rook over to h1. Gligorich responds by placing his rook on f8. And I always get asked, why, in the Ruy Lopez, is this bishop so important if it is a so-called bad bishop locked behind its own central pawns? The answer is that sometimes bad bishops fulfill very important roles. In this case, this bishop gives solidity to white's center and prevents black from reacting with the f5 break. Notice that the f5 square is controlled by 4 white pieces. And not even with the rook on f8 can Gligorich carry out that break. Now, since the correct breakthrough is on h4, Fischer moves his king to g2, while black prepares the defense with rook f7, reinforcing the second rank. Before breaking through with h4, Fischer must defend the pawn on g4 so it is not left under the bishop's threat. Therefore, he plays f3. The knight retreats to f8, and now everything is ready for the long-awaited breakthrough on h4. After the captures on that square, white recaptures with the rook, while Gligorich positions his rook on h7, ready for the defense. Fischer doubles on the h-file with rook h1. The rooks are exchanged, and after the recapture, Gligorich attacks the rook by pushing g5, to which Fischer replies by placing his rook on h6. At this point, white's advantage is clear. He dominates the only open file, one that leads directly to the black king. On top of that, he holds the bishop pair and a clear space advantage. Black, on the other hand, must tread very carefully if he hopes to defend. And this is precisely where Gligorich goes wrong, playing the seemingly innocent move king g7, attacking the rook. Now, all the fine opening play by white, combined with the correct positional handling in the middle game that brought the attack to this point, would be wasted if Fischer did not find the tactical blow that exists here. You can pause the video and try to find it. It is not very difficult. And if you did pause, I hope you succeeded. Fischer finished the game with the brilliant move rook takes f6. Double exclamation mark for this move. If black captures the rook with the queen, white delivers a double attack with knight h5, winning on the spot. If instead they capture the rook on f6 with the king, then follows bishop takes g5, a skewer against both king and queen. And for this reason, faced with such threats, Gligorich decided to resign. Another great performance by Fischer, and a perfect example of many concepts and ideas we must master in order to learn how to play the Ruy Lopez correctly. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video.